This was like fucking Beverly Hills. People that were coming around the house were the likes of Tony Curtis, Cary Grant, Marilyn Monroe, Marlon Brando. I mean, the cream of Hollywood were house guests that come, cocktail parties. And I'm this kid. I'm looking at these people like, you people are full of shit. I hate you all.
Wow.
I hate this reality. I hate this world. I hate this family. Get me the fuck out of here.
Hey everybody, it's Seano McFarlane. If you're enjoying the Seano Show, make sure to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. New episodes drop weekly. Don't miss out. Oh, you ready, brother? All right. I barely slept. I'm so excited. I sit down with a true outlaw legend, the one and only Mr. Jonathan Shaw. He's not just a tattoo artist. He's been a fucking cultural force. He's a mystic with a needle, a storyteller with scars, and a man who's seen the underworld and come back with wisdom, inked in blood and truth. We're going to go deep in this brother's ride, tattoos, transformation, and the price of freedom. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be here with you. It's an honor to know you.
Let's go back. Your father, Artie Shaw, big band leader, guru. Your mom was an accomplished actress. You want to tell us a little bit about your backstory about that?
She was a movie star. She grew up in extreme poverty. My maternal grandfather was a gypsy from Lithuania, stowed away on a ship when he was, I think, 14 or 15 years old to America. He got to America and he totally hid his gypsy heritage and, just learned English and just became a gung-ho all-American guy. He was ashamed of being a gypsy. There was a lot of prejudice against the Romani people back then. I think when he was like 16, he became a Marine and went to war and killed a lot of people. And I think he was good at that because his father and his uncles, they were robbers. They were highwaymen. And they would waylay and kidnap travelers back in their home country and torture them and kill them and take all their money.
Oh, my.
So he was a raging, violent, charming, but violent alcoholic by all accounts. And I didn't know him because he died shortly after I was born. But over the years, I managed to, especially when I went into this deep, deep inventory of, my life, my ancestors, the origins of the multi-generational curse, alcoholism, addiction, violence, sex, drugs, rock and roll, all. When I had to start really researching, every aspect of, what composes this weird entity that I call myself. So when I did all this deep diving and research and stuff, a lot of it went into other dimensions, shamanic practices, and came up with all this stuff. Who are these people that brought me into this life? So my mother, she grew up with her three siblings and just the insanity that they grew up with, the ultra violent situation in poverty. They didn't have any money. And my grandfather, he was a criminal. He was involved with, a lot of shady stuff, mob-related stuff. He might have even been a hitman for the mob. I mean, it was on that level. And he'd come home, drunk as a fiddler's bitch and just wreck everything. And my mother is this little girl, just watching all this. But according to her, she was the apple of his eye. At the same time, she had this upbringing where, she saw her father, duking it out with cops and just getting every bone in his body broken and not stop fighting. He would fight until he was literally unconscious. So she grew up with this kind of stuff. And I think when she was 16, she left home to become like a chorus girl. She was very beautiful. At some point, she started hanging out with a lot of sort of highfalutin people. At some point, she got into a poker game with a bunch of mobsters. I think it was, Frank Capra. Frank Capra, a very famous photographer, war horse. She was good friends with him.
Oh, wow.
And he was going to these underground sort of casinos, and she begged and cajoled and pleaded with him to take her to one of these poker games with all these mobsters. And he was like, no, you don't want to be with these guys. And she went there. According to the legend, she played poker because her father was a card shark
Oh, wow.
and had taught her, all the tricks.
Yeah.
So she went in and sat down with all these fucking wise guys and cleaned them out. And she had a lot of money all of a sudden. Meanwhile, her sister Constance, who was like my second mother before she killed herself in front of us. But anyway, so her sister had gone off to Italy to make movies. Her sister was actually an actress, and they'd somehow gotten herself over to Italy and was making movies and was hanging out with all these very fancy people, like Fellini and Ernest Hemingway and all these, intelligentsia of Europe in those days. It was right after the war. So my mother, she'd gotten all this money, and a few days after the poker game, the photographer, Frank Capra, came to her door and said, hey, these wise guys weren't real happy about being cleaned out by some little floozy. It might be best for you to leave town for a little while till things kind of cool down. She took all these, thousands of dollars and got on an Alitalia plane to join her sister in Italy. And then she became an actress, and her first role was in a movie called Bitter Rice.
Oh, wow.
They actually put a picture of her on an Italian postage stamp maybe 20 years ago, commemorating the new cinema movement, and all that cultural stuff. So she wound up being an icon in Italy, came back to America and met Billy Wilder and was his girlfriend. He put her in a movie that really kind of marked my life in a lot of ways, just having watched it as a young kid, a movie called The Lost Weekend. And she played the bar girl. That movie had a profound effect on my life, because the movie's about an alcoholic writer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I grew up to become an alcoholic
Yes,
writer.
you did, brother. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, long story.
Yeah.
Long story. Long
But
stories.
it's a good map, and it's a map that we're going to break down a little bit. But your dad was this international star, extraordinary musician.
So my dad was like fucking Elvis,
Right?
Michael Jackson, Mick Jagger.
He was a fucking legend.
Yeah,
You think of Sinatra, you think already shot. I mean, he's that big.
He was a player,
And then, but a shitty dad.
no dad.
No dad.
No,
and
not,
he was
not a
out.
shitty. Well, he a shitty man in a lot of ways, but an amazing genius. So he was also a sex and love addict, big time. Like he married 9 times, and he had a thing, for marrying alcoholic women. If they weren't alcoholic, they were dysfunctional in other ways.
They had to be troubled.
There was something. And so my mother was wife number 7 or 8, but he'd married Lana Turner, Ava Gardner, and he'd had extramarital, whatever, his affairs with the likes of Judy Garland and Billie Holiday. He started Billie Holiday's career.
Wow.
Hired her for the first time she ever was in a band, was my father hired her. So he married my mother, and they stayed together about long enough to have me. And then,
He takes off. Your mom's raising you. She's getting deep into her alcoholism.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And it's fucking madness and chaos.
My mother's an alkie. She's married 2 other guys. She married my first stepfather, who I really liked, and I was probably 5 or 6 years old. And my last memory was of her cracking his head open with a marble lampstand and blood everywhere, and the ambulance and the cops, taking him to the hospital. And somehow she didn't get to go to jail for that, but never saw him again. Shortly after that, she brought home this other guy who became my stepfather forever. And this guy was just like your classic enabler, very sick man. Just a milquetoast soy boy kind of man who was her co-conspirator in her alcoholism. So he didn't drink, but he was the guy that was good. Al-Anon, on steroids, untreated Al-Anon on steroids, just the worst, passive aggressive, just a creep of a human being. Oh my God. And so when they got together, it was like, who are these fucking people? This is abhorrent to my soul. I got to get out of here. This was like fucking Beverly Hills people that were coming around the house were the likes of Tony Curtis, Cary Grant, Marilyn Monroe, Marlon Brando. I mean, the cream of Hollywood were house guests. They'd come, have cocktail parties. And I'm this kid. I'm looking at these people like, you people are full of shit. I hate you all.
Wow.
I hate this reality. I hate this world. I hate this family. Get me the fuck out of here. So, I started looking for escape at a very early age. Comic books became a real portal to a world that I found much more to my liking. EC Comics, and then, those really gory old comic books before they came in, made everything sort of sanitized with the comic book code. So, Tales from the Crypt and, all these crime comic books that would have pleased, Bukowski, probably read them himself as a kid, I never asked him that. But I wanted to be a comic book artist. And, as I grew a little older, then, I was like 12, 13 years old and smoking weed, drinking, stealing pills from my mother's medicine cabinet, all that, I had a little group of friends and we were all kind of coming from these fucked up families and banded together and became a gang. And we'd go around and, just do all kinds of delinquent shit, and but at the same time we were very cultural kids. Like we loved jazz music. We'd go and hang out in these these black jazz clubs down in the hood, and sneak in. And I saw like John Coltrane, I saw Miles Davis, I saw Ornette Coleman, I saw Thelonious Monk, I saw guys like that in these smoky, shadowy little jazz dives. Several years later, I was strung out like a lab rat, living in some crash pad in Hollywood, watching my friends die of overdoses, dropping like flies all around me. And at some point, I realized I was going to die. Things were really bad. I just read On the Road by Jack Kerouac. I'd stolen it from an all-night newsstand that used to be up on the corner of Hollywood and Cahuenga. And I went in there and they had a little section with paperback books. And I saw this book. I saw the title, On the Road. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know who Kerouac was. I didn't know anything. The title of the book is what grabbed me. And so
what year was this?
Probably early 70s.
Yeah.
So I saw this book just because of the title, took it home, read it from cover to cover, and I said, that's the way out. That's the salvation. That's where I could do what this guy did and then some. I'm just going out on the road. That was a seed planted, but I didn't actually manifest until years later when I was strung out, in Hollywood and really messed up and people were dying. My girlfriend died. A lot of my friends died. A lot of other people, we're dying, and we were like a dying breed. Around that time, we were, this band of stoned out kids, a lot of whom were geniuses, but all fucked up, every one of us. But in that time period, we went with the Manson family for a while, Led Zeppelin when they were in town, Rolling Stones when they were living in LA. We were actually copping dope for Keith. By means of Marshall Chess, who was managing the Rolling Stones. So we were always up at Marshall's house. We were, kind of cool kids on the streets of Hollywood, living that rock and roll lifestyle, and got to run with some, in the company of some interesting people. We were hanging out with Jim Morrison, Frank Zappa. These guys were, kind of like our big brothers, our heroes. And, they were just like, yeah, come on in, kid.
Come on, hang out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like it is now, yeah.
Yeah, Graham Parsons, all these people,
Yeah, wow,
so,
what a time.
Yeah, it was that time in Hollywood. It really was.
Why don't we move to you hitchhiking to Mexico?
I'd hung out with Bukowski. I wanted to be a writer. I was writing. And at some point, I said, fuck it. I got nothing to lose here. All my friends are dying. I'm going to be dead soon. Something in my spirit just said, get out. I didn't have any money. I kicked dope cold turkey in a dirty little room. Oh, we were breaking into doctors' offices. We had, script pads. We were, selling Dilaudid. We were.
Yeah, you were the original drugstore cowboy. Yeah, big time.
There was a bunch of us, Anyway, it was so much. I mean, this has all been written about. I got to keep it brief on this because, buy the fucking book, man. If you want to
buy the
know.
book, we'll get it. I know, but you got to be the book right now. We got to give a version of the book. We got to get the author speaking to us right now, buddy.
Buy the fucking book.
Buy the fucking book. We got all three of them here.
The movie doesn't do it justice, even though,
it gives you a nice taste, man. You're kind of, I get it.
First one's free,
Yeah, the first one's free.
Keep coming back.
Buy the fucking book, right? Buy some fucking artwork from this man. All right, but
that too, yeah. So at some point, I just said, fuck it. I got nothing to lose. There's a whole world out there. And I was just like, this ain't working. And so I, wandered down to the highway with like an overnight satchel, change of underwear, and pair of socks, and maybe $100 in my pocket that I managed to save by not being strung out, having kicked. We'd sell drugs, and then we'd buy drugs.
Right.
So we'd have some money, then we'd spend it on drugs. So now there was a little bit of money left over, $200, and I figured that could get me. I'd seen another book in that bookstore, that place where I stole the copy of On the Road from. The other book was Mexico on $5 a day. So I'm doing my math. I'm like, $5 a day. Okay, I got $200.
And where'd you have in Veracruz?
Yeah, well, I hoboed around Mexico. I stuck my thumb out on the highway, ended up in Mexico, hoboed around Mexico for many months, maybe a year. And then eventually I ended up in this port town called Veracruz on the Gulf of Mexico.
But is that where you saw the sailors with all the tattoos, and that kind of got you inspired? I
started seeing a lot of tattoos on sailors there. I was trying to get work on a ship. My idea was when I got to Veracruz, I saw these ships going and coming and going. And I was like, yeah, I'll get a ship. I'll get work on a ship and work my way to Brazil. So, I hung out on the docks, and that's where I first started seeing a lot of tattoos. And that's where I started, hand poking tattoos on sailors, and, eventually did get work on a ship and ended up in Brazil.
And then you started doing tattoos in Brazil, right?
Yeah, I met a couple of other guys. This was like 1975. I ended up jumped ship in the north of Brazil, traveled around, got work on fishing boats, and had made a little bit of money. Not much, but enough money to feed myself for a little while. But then that money ran out, and I wound up hitchhiking from the north of Brazil slowly all the way down to Rio de Janeiro. It took probably months and months to get there. When I got to Rio, I fell in with a bunch of kids, kind of delinquents, travelers, alcoholics, addicts, and we had a great time. Met a couple of young guys my age who were also interested in learning to tattoo, but there was nowhere you could learn to tattoo, especially in Brazil in those days. There was one crusty old scab vendor in Brazil that had a place in the back of a whorehouse in the port of Santos, south of Rio de Janeiro. That was the only real bona fide tattoo man in the whole country. But we started just fucking around and experimenting. You couldn't get tattoo equipment or anything like that back in the day. So we started building like jailhouse kind of machines. So one guy knew how to, make something resembling, a jailhouse tattoo machine. And then we started fucking around and building these, homemade rigs. And because at that point, everybody was tattooing by hand, like hand poking with just needles and, thread and India ink. And then we started playing around with, building machines. And then one thing led to another, and somebody got a hold of a real tattoo machine. And, so we were tattooing each other and, tattooing neighborhood kids. And yeah, that's where I started.
And then you made your way to really learn to Long Beach, the Pike, right?
Yeah. At some point after being in Brazil like that for years and years, all my friends were like, man, you're a fucking gringo. You got a passport. You could go to America and, and learn to really tattoo and bring some real tattoo stuff home. One of the guys that I kind of grew up in tattooing with back in Brazil, he wound up to become the one of the founders of the Brazilian chapter of the Hells Angels. He's still around. He's a big deal, man. He's a big fucking deal, not just as a veteran Hells Angel, but he's also a big deal because he's became one of the primary tattoo man, not just in Brazil, but all over the world. He wound up moving to Europe and starting tattoo shops there. And, he's kind of like an elder dude. And those are my contemporaries.
Right
man.
On, man.
I find sometimes it's hard to believe that I'm like, like a veteran of the tattoo thing, that we were like really the founders of this whole situation that has emerged, over the years. I mean, yeah, we put in our time and we did our shit, and, particularly I was very involved with this, with this community, with this world. But, yeah, so, they kind of egged me on to, come back to the States and, learn about tattooing and then bring some of the knowledge and the equipment back home. And, so I did. I went and got work on a ship again, because now I had Siemens papers from the first one. So it was easy to get work on a ship that was going to the States. They said, "Oh, you got a passport. Okay, you can come." And wound up in Long Beach, the port of Long Beach. And I'm wandering around there. I don't know nothing, I don't know anything about, tattoo. Where am I going to find anything? But I knew from when I was a teenager, we used to sneak out and, and go down to the Long Beach Pike, which was kind of like the Coney Island of the West Coast. It was a place, it was a real rough and tumble kind of place. It was this old, decrepit amusement park. And it was, populated by sailors and, Navy yards were nearby, and sailors from all over the world, bikers, just white trash, all workers. And, it was not Disneyland. Disneyland was for sissies, this was like the real deal. So I remembered from the Pike, as a teenager, I remember staring in the window of all these tattoo shops. They had a ton of tattoo shops and dive bars and, amusement park and penny arcades. And then they had tattoo shops. They had a lot of tattoo shops. It was the place, I guess, on the West Coast where, where you would go if you had it in your head to get tattooed, So I got off the ship there in Long Beach, and I'm like, oh man, I could see the roller coaster and stuff from the shipyard, and I was like, that's where I gotta go. And so I started wandering around there, walked into one shop, hey, where I could get one of them tattoo guns and get chased out with a baseball bat. I guess that's not the right approach. Back in the day, it was, tattoo guys were, pretty secretive about their trade secrets, so, but I managed to meet and make the acquaintance of some real tattoo guys who took a liking to me. One of them was Bob Shaw, who was a legendary tattoo man, and he took me under his wing and told everybody I was his nephew because we had the same name. And he was more of a father to me than,
Wow.
Well, way more. I mean, he was like my father in tattooing. He was my tattoo dad. In writing, Bukowski was my tattoo dad. My writing, my literature dad, So it's like, I think I wrote about this in the book where, it's like we who don't have fathers, we find our fathers in the places where our destiny takes us. So it was like Artie, my father, he didn't have a father either, so my father, he found his father in these old black jazz men in like fucking speakeasies in Harlem, where he learned to play the horn. And I found my father in a tattoo shop in the, sandwiched between, a dive bar and a penny arcade in the,
That's beautiful.
Long Beach Pike,
And how long did you study with him for?
Well, I didn't really study. I hung out. It wasn't a formal kind of thing. It's not, he let you hang around. And then I do, go do beer runs for him or, mop up the puke when somebody got sick or chase, bums out the door, came in begging for change or whatever. I was kind of like the shop helper.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to watch him and hang out with him a lot, just absorb that special wisdom, that he carried. And at some point, he started, he started letting me ask a few questions. So I'd ask some questions and then he'd start explaining stuff to me, and, at one point he put a machine in my hand and said, go tattoo yourself, practice on yourself. Maybe we'll let you tattoo one of these winos that stumbles in here, and eventually that's how it went, and, I tattooed a few winos and, eventually he was like, well, we got a job for you, and he put me to work. And so I worked there in Long Beach with him. Then he moved to Texas and I stayed there in Long Beach working with his partner, who was a Colonel Todd, and old Kentucky Colonel kind of guy, real shit kicking, like a real tattoo man, good guy, but like, no nonsense. And I worked with him for a while. And then 1981 or 82, the city decided they're going to close the Pike, what was left of it. At that point, there wasn't much left of it anyway. It was kind of decrepit. They'd knocked down the roller coaster. Really, all that was left of the Pike by 1982 was just a bunch of dive bars and tattoo shops and a couple of penny arcades, and all the rides were gone. But it was still the place where, like, low rent kind of white trash people would come and hang out, and, the cholos were there around, low riding in there. It was like a real, it was a cool place.
Yeah.
They closed down the Pike, and Bob Shaw had moved to Texas. So I followed him to Houston, Texas, and worked with him there for like about a year. And then from there, I moved to New Orleans, and New Orleans to New York, then back to Brazil, opened a tattoo shop in British Honduras for a while when they had the Falklands War was going on. I flew from New Orleans down to Belize City when it was a real shithole. This is back in the, 80s. Early 80s, before tourists went there, it was a real shithole, man. Literally shithole. There was like open sewers on every side, every street. The whole place smelled like, everybody there just shit their pants at once, So I opened a tattoo shop right in the main street of fucking Belize City because they were having the Falklands War in Argentina, and the British had a military base there, and they were sending all these troops to Belize to train and get ready to go to war in the Malvinas, the Falklands War in Argentina. So I was like, great, there's a military base right here, and I'm the only guy with a tattoo shop. I opened the tattoo shop next to a pub that all the troops would go and get hammered every night. So these guys had me working 24 hours a day, man.
Wow. Even being a junkie, even being an alkie, there was something about you that was like determined. Like you went to Bukowski, knocked on his fucking door.
Yeah.
You found this great master tattoo. You know how to go to find the right people.
Something in my stars just gave me this.
It's interesting. I love that.
This tenacity.
Kind of fearless that way.
Weird.
Yeah.
I never knew anything like fear. Like real fear, until I got sober. I think that's why I liked liquor and drugs so much.
Yeah, I think so too, man.
Like in the big book, it says, men and women drink because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Well, I think conversely, I drink because I don't like the effect produced by sobriety.
Mm-hmm. No shit.
All the fears and all the traumas and all the harms and hurts and worries and memories and, delusions and self-centered, funky behaviors all bubble up to the surface when you put the plug in the jug.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're dealing with
real stuff,
causes and conditions.
Yes, sir.
The demonic possession, because I really believe, talking about alcoholism, I believe to the core of me that, when they talk about a spiritual malady, they're not just whistling Dixie out their ass, man. Spiritual malady.
We got to talk about New York, because you go out there and you started a fucking revolution, And it's what an interesting time to be in New York City.
It was. It's almost like I think that's why on some levels, after I wrote these first 2 books of the Scab Vendor memoir series, those books only take you up to me being about 22 years old. There's a lot more stories, but I think it's been hard for me to write about those years because they were so impactful in my life in so many ways. So much went down, so many things, so many people, places, adventures, and getting, sort of successful, and suddenly becoming like, this, iconic presence, it was like a lot of my dreams came true, but it was all nightmarish in a lot of ways. It was good times, but, I was strung out again because I'd gotten sober. It's a long story, but, before I got hooked on liquor and drugs again, I was actually stark raving sober in New York. I was sober, abstinent, but I had no connection to any sort of healing situation. So I was living like this crazy unconscious thug, man. I was living a really like rock and roll lifestyle, man. I was running with, mobsters, Hells Angels, fast women, movie stars,
rap stars, yeah,
all
everybody,
that shit,
everybody.
All that. I mean, I was right in the thick of it, man, in New York in, the mid 80s when it was all going down. I was tattooing, anybody and everybody who, like household names, people's, and I was running with these people, and I was living like, like a rock star without a fucking band. But I was fucking stark raving fucking crazy. I was nuts. I was talk about untreated alcoholism because I didn't drink. I didn't have anything to, keep this monster in check. So I was just running amok, man, and it was all that. Just, I was married to a beautiful Brazilian gal, who I loved, dearly loved forever. We came up from Brazil together because after everything else, I'd gone back to Brazil to fulfill my obligation to bring tattooing to Brazil and did that. And then I moved back to the States, New York. And by then I was married to my wife. And we came to New York together and we built this whole empire. And she was right there by my side through all this stuff. And I just went ape shit in New York, destroyed that marriage. We parted ways, with tears in our eyes in a, loving way, but, we couldn't stay together because I was going this way and she was going that way, or I should say she was going that way and I was going that way. So yeah, and then after that, it was just all sex, drugs, rock and roll, and in that period, I created a whole fucking empire and did a whole lot of stuff and, launched the first real solid mainstream tattoo magazine. They had me on David Letterman's show. I was, living that.
Clint Eastwood movie? You were in a Clint Eastwood movie?
They put me in a Clint Eastwood movie, yeah.
Yeah.
All this kind of stuff, tattooing, all these famous people. And it was a dream come true, and at the same time, I mean, yeah, I had a good run, but eventually I, crashed and burned and ate shit and died 1,000 deaths, and that's when I had to get sober. But boy, a lot. So I guess what I'm saying is all those years in New York, 15 years, it's hard for me to really even. I haven't been able to write about it because I think it's kind of tugs at me, in this deep way, because there's so much went down then, and there were so many people that I've almost buried a lot of those memories. So they'll come out when it's time for me to, call in the forces that feed me this stuff, back,
Yeah.
but it's still very fresh.
Wow. Okay.
Even though it's like 20 something years ago.
Mm-hmm.
it's almost 25 years ago when I, got sober and left New York and sold everything and moved to Brazil to write these books, but it still feels really so fresh. It's easier for me to go back to my childhood, my adolescent years. And then it starts getting so fresh and real that it's kind of like painful for me to revisit that because, I burned a lot of bridges and lost a lot of stuff and people, died. And there was just, yeah, it was a hard time, man. I mean, because I felt like doing these deep dives that enabled me to write these books, I felt like it was a form of, real spiritual surgery where you go and vivisect your own life without anesthesia. It was almost a necessity. I was compelled to do all that writing and do all that research and do all that digging. And, I laughed and I cried and I bled when I was writing this stuff, And I think that's what people love so much about the books, the people that do read them, they're like, holy shit, because it comes from the fucking heart of the wound. It's, and there's humor, there's dark humor. And it's, I could do that with this stuff. But some of these wounds are maybe so fresh that I'm just like, man, I just want to go to the beach, It's like,
I get it. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, we're going to get two things and then we'll get sober. The Picasso that you did on that guy. That was fucking beautiful, man.
Picasso-esque.
Where did that come from? That's
the original incentive for that was there was an artist, sort of, an underground artist here in Southern California that I met who did some paintings in that style, that sort of neo-cubist kind of style that as soon as I saw it, I was like, whoa, that's exactly, it just touched my soul in a way that I was like, yeah, that's going to look good on somebody's back.
Mm-hmm. How long did it take you to do that tattoo? Poor guy.
Fuck. I don't remember. I mean, months.
Yeah.
But Philip Liu, who's like, the god of tattooing, was working with me at the time. And he was there for that. And he's an interesting cat. I mean, he started tattooing when he was 10 years old. His parents were hippies, gypsies, living in the streets of India. He grew up on the streets of fucking like Calcutta and shit.
Wow.
And started tattooing when he was like 8 years old or 9. And his dad was this hippie, crazy, wild man. They just made a documentary about him, tattoo guy. And Philip grew up in this thing and became like, went to Japan and studied with like the great masters in Japan, and then went and studied with Ed Hardy. And, by the time he came to me, he was like a seasoned tattoo man, and he was only like 20 years old. And he was like a seasoned tattoo man, like one of the greatest that ever lived, like a legend already at 20. Now he must be, in his 50s or something, but I mean, still like a huge legend. Anyway, so he came to me when he was like 20 years old. He wanted to work with me. He'd had some drama here on the West Coast. He'd gotten sort of threatened and ostracized from a situation. And so I was like, well, come on over here. I knew him. We'd met before because I'd worked with a guy named Spider Webb in New York, and Spider was friends with all these people. And I'd met a lot of people through Spider, including Philip and his dad. And I'd even met Andy Warhol through Spider. It was a crazy time, Basquiat, all these people around, So, but anyway, Philip came to work with me, and we worked side by side in this tiny little room. And that was the original Fun City tattoo that I'd started in New York. And it was me and Philip Liu, and we were just cranking out groundbreaking kind of stuff that people hadn't seen before, And Philip was a big inspiration to me because he'd be doing his stuff, which nobody had ever seen before. And then he was like egging me on to do other kind of different innovative stuff, So, I mean, he was a huge influence. And yeah, God bless Philip, man. What an amazing artist. But so anyway, so I had this painting that I'd purchased from this West Coast artist, of this weird cubist faces kind of thing. And I just had it hanging on my wall. And one day, you know, I said to this guy who was kind of like my shop helper, I was like, I want to put that fucking thing on your back. Like, you know, from asshole to appetite. And he was like, okay. So we sat down and made that thing.
Wow,
you know,
it's beautiful.
And
piece.
then, you know, I went on from there to, you know, sort of take off from that painting that this artist had done that inspired me. And I started doing my own version of that same kind of style. And it's just been evolving over the years and decades to, you know, I'm still doing that kind of stuff today, you know, just in different configurations and stuff. But that kind of became like a style.
Yeah, it was a style.
Yeah, a style that I
and people wanted that style.
People still do.
Yeah, no shit, brother.
I've been on tour for the last 2 years tattooing tattoo artists. 90% of my clients are tattoo artists who remember, you know, the stuff I was doing back in the 90s. And they're, you know, these guys have been tattooing 20, 30 years now. And they see me as some kind of reference because when they were just starting, I was the dude that was in all the magazines and all this stuff. So they've been very kind and they've invited me to come and sit in their shops all across the country and tattoo them and their friends and their, you know, their little local tattoo community. All these tattoo artists will come to me and just be like, yes, leave out this arm, you know. So the last 2 years, after being retired from tattooing for almost 20 years, I still drew a lot. And then suddenly these drawings turned into me coming back to tattooing and, you know, carving all this crazy artwork onto all these, you know, really cool tattoo people.
What's it like from all these guys giving you so much love and respect and admiration?
It's lovely. It's
beautiful, man.
Yeah, it's really.
Is it hard for you to take it in, or is it easy?
No, I'm soak it up, man.
You soak it up.
I love it,
boy.
I love it because, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful, you know, for the opportunity to sort of come back into a world that's evolved, you know, exponentially to the point where it's unrecognizable, but that I was kind of one of the guys that launched that fucking slingshot, you know, that went so far.
Mm-hmm.
And now I come back in kind of like a little bit like Rip Van Winkle kind of thing, you know. It's like, you know, it's like, what the fuck happened here, man? You know, this thing's exploded into like this, you know, $10 billion a year industry. You know, this started in the fucking back rooms of, you know, whorehouses and dive bars and, you know, shit like that, you know, and now it's like this thing. They got TV shows, they got fucking libraries full of books and, you know, contests and conventions all over the world every fucking other day. It's become like this huge culture. It's kind of like I equate it to like what rock and roll, how did rock and roll start? You know, some little barn in Alabama, you know, with a bunch of guys just picking and grinning there, you know, and just taking inspiration from old blues guys that, you know, sitting by the side of the railroad tracks just playing a guitar, you know, and you know, that it was a very grassroots kind of folk arty kind of thing. And now look at it, you know, it's like rock and roll Hall of Fame, you know,
all the stuff,
all the stuff.
Yeah.
You know, the fucking Hard Rock Cafe. I mean, you know, it becomes a fucking, anything these fucking vampires can fucking cash in on.
Yeah.
Becomes like, you know, up for grabs.
Yeah.
So, you know, with tattooing, it's become like that, but there's still like an undercurrent, a very hardcore undercurrent of real tattoo people, like guys that honor the tradition and the history of the thing and love it and understand it and, you know, have reverence for, you know, the kind of guys that I came up under, you know, the old school tattoo artists that I learned from. And now, you know, I'm like that second generation, and these guys who are the third generation, they still have that love and that respect for, you know, their lineage, their history.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really pleasant to be around people like that because, you know, because not only do they treat you with love and respect, but also they are lovable and respectable.
No, it's beautiful what you started, the tradition and people honoring it. It's a beautiful thing.
And I like that tribe. I mean, there's shitheads everywhere, but I've come across. But after being almost 50 years in that tattoo thing, it's like you kind of become kind of thick-skinned. Yeah, there's shitheads. You know that. Okay, that's cool. But for the most part, it's all love, man. It's been all good.
All right, one other chapter, then we're gonna get sober. You collected guns there for a while, and the government said, "Oh, you got quite a few guns here, brother." Cache of weapons. I don't know how many felony counts were you arrested for?
Like close to 100.
Yeah, they're pretty serious charges.
Serious charges.
Yeah,
they were going to put me away for, decades.
Yeah,
they were going to put me behind bars for decades.
What was going through your head when that happened?
Oh shit.
This is where you're actually scared a little bit?
Yeah, I was sober.
This is like
I was sober.
Oh, you were sober when
I was sober, man. Because see, when I was running Fun City all those years, I was running with, some shady kind of people, and I was one of them. And, it was good to have some guns around. And I just, people would come and pay me with guns, I'd acquired a lot of firearms, and I had all kinds of guns. I loved guns.
Yeah.
Something I might have inherited from my father. He was a big marksman. He liked guns too. I didn't know that, really. But, some of this stuff is just wired into your hard drive, But, so I had a lot of guns. And then after I sobered up, after 9/11, I sobered up. Before 9/11, actually, I was sober for that. But so I sobered up, and then I just took everything when I decided to, after I sobered up, and 9/11 happened, and I'd been in Japan tattooing with the Yakuza. I was tattooing for the Yakuza in Japan, and 9/11 happened, and I came back to New York. And after 9/11, I said, this is it. I'm leaving this country. I'm leaving New York. Going back to Brazil. And so I took everything. I sold this building that I owned in New York. I owned a beautiful building. Sold the building, sold the tattoo shop, packed up everything I owned, stuck it in storage, shipped a bunch of it to Brazil, but couldn't ship all those guns to Brazil. So I put those in a storage locker in New York City and moved back to Brazil and stayed there for, years and years and years, and wrote all these books. That's what I did. I retired from tattooing. I said, I'm moving back to Brazil. I'm going to be a writer. Tattooing, that page is turned, and I'm just going to devote myself to, writing these books. And I did. At some point, I took a trip up to New York. I think I'd finished writing a bunch of these books, and now I was getting offered publishing deals, and somebody else wanted to make a movie about me, and there was all kinds of based on my books, and there was all this stuff going on. So I was like, okay, I'll go back to the States and start doing this stuff. So, but I didn't want to live in New York anymore because I'd sold my building, sold the tattoo shop, didn't want to go back to that life. So I moved to California and started writing a screenplay. I was staying at Johnny Depp's house, and he wanted me to write a screenplay based on my books. And so I started writing this screenplay for him, which never really went anywhere. But, and then I was living in California. I was living at Johnny's house. And at some point, I flew to New York for some kind of business, some kind of meetings or something. I don't remember what I was doing in New York, but I was there. And I was in New York, and I was having dinner with this dear friend of mine, Eugene Hutz. He's frontman for a band called Gogol Bordello. And we were hanging out. We were having dinner, and my little cell phone rang. And it was this friend of mine had been kind of like a personal assistant to me for years, and also was one of my editors. She helped me edit these books. Real smart chick, good friend. Kind of like my little sister. And she called me. She lived in New York, and she called me and she said, "Hey, man, the cops just came to my house and they're looking for you." And I was like, "Really?" And I was like, "Oh, shit." And apparently they somehow they'd gotten into my storage locker and found all these guns there. Because I'd hired some guys that were going to move all my shit to California. That's what it is. And these guys, I guess they saw these guns and they ratted me out to the cops. So the cops showed up at the storage place and they found all this stuff, and they went to my friend's house looking for me because that was the address that was the storage place was registered to, because I didn't have a place in New York anymore. I was staying in a hotel. And so, yeah, I left the dinner and I went back to my hotel, and I was going to pack up my shit and get the hell out of there, get out of town. And my phone starts ringing. It's the cops. They got my number. And they're like, "Listen, we need you to come surrender yourself, And I was like, yeah, I'll do that right now, but I got to talk to a lawyer first, And they were like, no, you have to come down here now. And I'm like, yeah, I get it, but I got to talk to a lawyer first. So I'm dialing lawyers and friends who know lawyers and stuff and trying to, figure out what to do. And all of a sudden the hotel room door just opens and fucking SWAT team just comes in like, "Get on the fucking floor, if I'm gonna blow your fucking head off, get on the floor." And I'm just like, "Yep," on the floor. And they took me to the fucking pokey. Yeah.
And you got a good lawyer. She did a good job.
She sure did.
Damn, brother. You another angel that day.
Yeah. Well, the real angel was my little brother, Johnny. He heard about it.
He got you.
It was
counsel,
on the
right?
news, and he bailed me the fuck out of that. I mean, I'm eternally indebted to him. Like, yeah, he got me the top mob lawyer in New York City, and his daughter is Stacy Richmond, who is my lawyer, and we became such dear friends because I was sober for like 10 years at this point when this is all going down. I'm getting raked over the coals for the wreckage of my past, because I'm not living around. I'm not toting guns around town anymore. I'm like this sober kind of, nice guy, peace and love kind of hippie dude now, and, I'm not that fucking, wild-eyed thug from back in the Fun City days. But, my past came back to bite me in the ass.
As it does sometimes for people.
As it does.
Right.
As it should be, I suppose, So yeah, I went through, they took my fucking passport. I couldn't travel.
They're pretty serious.
House arrest. They took all my computers, all my fucking phones. I mean, all my fucking journals. They took everything, and a lot of it never came back. And of course, they took all the guns. There were some nice guns, man. There was some really nice armaments there. I mean, there was grenades. There was all kinds of shit, man.
I know. I saw the pictures. There
was all kinds of shit.
Yeah, it looked like a drug cartel storage facility.
Yeah, it was kind of like that. And this was post 9/11.
Yeah.
So they
might have been a little jumpy.
They thought of me as some kind of fucking terrorist, They thought, and they knew I was associated
with... I as a terrorist in a film.
Yeah. Okay. Who, me? So, yeah, that was... that was a dark kind of period, but I mean, because I was like, suddenly I was grounded, they clipped my fucking wings and, tore off all my feathers, and put me in a little cage, and even after they bailed me out and I was out of the cage, I was still kind of earthbound, I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't go back to Brazil. I couldn't do shit, and that went on for years. Interestingly enough, my lawyer, Stacy, such a beautiful soul. And she, she really liked me because I just told her, You tell me jump and I say how high. That's how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you say, you're the boss. And she was like, wow. Okay, she's not used to that. She's dealing with all these fucking thugs, and mobsters, and they're like, fuck you, I'll tell you what you're going to do. And I was just like, listen, I put my fucking life in your hands. I trust you implicitly. You do what you got to do. Get me the fuck out of this situation. Right. And anything you tell me to do, I obey. I learned that in AA in the early years. I had sponsors who told me, shut the fuck up and obey.
Right
Just
on.
do what I say. I needed that.
And it worked in your favor.
So she, at one point, she told me to do all this different stuff. But one thing she told me to do, because we'd walk around the streets of New York together, like just after the trials, we'd go out, we'd walk around the East Village. And I was still pretty well known in that community. I was famous in that community. And people would be coming up to me every fucking few steps. People would come up, hey, Jonathan, how you doing? Hey, Shaw, this and that. And there was a lot of people who I'd helped get sober. And people would come up to me and go, I'd introduce, oh, this is Stacy, and they'd be like, this guy saved my fucking life, da-da-da-da-da. So her ears perked up and she was like, wow, you got all these people that, you've helped, since you've been sober. Sponsored a lot of guys and, just took people to meetings and, you did a lot of good stuff since you've been sober. That's a good thing. I want you to do this. I want you to start getting in touch with some of these people in 12-step programs and get them to write little records, write little letters of character reference letters to the court. So I did that, and I wound up with like 50 letters from different people, and some of them were quite well known, And one of them was the son of one of them was a superior court judge in California, whose son I used to run with, and I helped him get sober.
Right on.
The first time around. So anyway, so I had all these letters, even from judges, from, kind of fancy people, and then just from garden variety junkies, but, all these people going like, oh, this guy got me sober, he saved my life, blah, blah, blah. And so Stacy, my lawyer, she presented all these character references to the court. Turns out that the judge was 40 years sober in AA.
Wow. How about them apples?
Found this out afterwards,
yeah.
Way after the fact, because before the trial started, Stacy, my lawyer, and this judge were in the same elevator together going to some legal function or whatever, these people hang out together. And he said to her, oh, yeah, that tattoo guy, that client of yours, he's going away for a long time. And Stacy was like, no, Your Honor, I don't think so. He was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to throw the fucking book at that scumbag. He told her that. And at the end of this, after he read all those letters, I get teary-eyed about this because he actually apologized to me when he dismissed the case. I mean, it wasn't like he was like, yeah, I'm so sorry you had to go through all this, because there was other mitigating factors in this thing. Like some of those guns were legal. They tried to make it out that they were all hot guns and stuff. And some of those guns I had bought legally and had fucking permits for in New York City. And prosecutor tried to bury that to just make it look as bad as he could. The prosecutor was Cyrus Vance Jr.
Wow.
Real scumbag, Yeah. Power hungry fucking reptilian piece of work, But the judge dismissed the case and actually apologized to me and, said, sorry you had to go through all this, Mr. Shaw. I was like, what? Yeah, it was nice.
Wow. Talking to the audience right now, what's the most important thing somebody has to do to get sober?
Eat shit, die 1,000 deaths, crash and burn again and again and again till that's enough. Nobody sails into recovery on the wings of victory. I sure as hell didn't. I had to eat shit and die 1,000 deaths, and I had to be willing to go to any lengths to do anything that would lift that merciless obsession from my soul.
Mm.
And it hasn't been easy,
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't trade it for all the tea in China, man, because it's been, just a rich and fulfilling life. I'm not going to say it's been pain-free because, it's like you can't create decades of horrible destruction and unconscious living and then, suddenly wake up and, walk through a garden of roses. It's going to be, you're going to have to dredge up some fucking demonic shit and, expose it to the light of, of healing. But, if you don't want to repeat, if you don't want your past to be your future, then you're going to do whatever you got to do but it usually takes a lot of pain. Pain
You've
is
been
the
sober
great
for
teacher.
how long now?
Going on 25 years.
Right, 25 years.
Yeah.
And then what would you say, buddy, to the person's been sober for a while, but life's difficult, life's scary, life's they don't want to relapse, maybe want to kill themselves, that in-between spot of it's just scary to be alive. The world's coming in a little bit. What's your counsel to that person?
I wake up with that fear in my heart every morning. And that's why I have to get straight into prayer and relating my life to a power greater than myself. I have to get into action. I have to, ask God to give me the ability to get out of myself and be a humble servant.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody's in pain. This whole fucking world is in pain. There's nobody in this world that's not suffering some kind of affliction. And if they're not, well, they haven't yet. I don't think there's anybody in this world that doesn't come equipped with, an existential dilemma. That's just par for the fucking course.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm just one more shit-brained alky, striving to recover, then I'm gonna encounter challenges and pain just like everybody else in this goddamn world does. So, there's a program of recovery. Nobody ever said it was going to be easy, but it's kind of like, in the spiritual practice that I work with. We've talked about the plant medicine, in the church that I work with. We have a lot of wise teachings that come to different aparelhos, different channels through from the astral, and one of them says, "Quem fica firme apanha e quem correr vai sofrer mais." This is all based in Brazil. And what it means is those who stand firm will get beat up, but those who run will suffer more. Sooner or later.
That's a real get down, man.
Do you want to stand firm and get beat up a little bit, or do you want to suffer more? Because you will. I know that from experience. Like if you don't toe the line, there's so many, God is patient, but the universe has laws that are in effect. And I don't want to, not only do I not want to bear the consequences of not living this life, as correctly as I possibly can, but I also don't want to give up all the blessings that I've gained, because every time I've had to walk through some dark night of the soul, and there's been many in these 25 years, every time I've had to walk through fucking fire to get to the other side of that, when I got to the other side, I was like, oh boy, I'm sure glad I didn't drink or kill myself, because this is fucking awesome. the blessings do come, you know, but it's work.
It's work.
So if you want to do the work, you know, keep coming back, man.
Keep going back.
And if you run, God pity you, man, because it gets worse.
Mm-hmm.
I know, because
I know you do.
I know. You know, I know you know.
I do know. I know very well.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, it's rare that you meet an artist with your magnitude who's a fucking kind soul. And it's just, you're a special cat, man.
But you're a special cat. So you got to meet a lot of special cats because that's who you are. And
Yeah.
like attracts like, right?
Yeah, like, I know, but it's, you know, it's just nice to play jazz with you, man. It's just nice to play, right? Because you're just, yeah, it's beautiful. We're still here. And we're going to continue to do beautiful things.
God willing.
Right?
God
And you're going to
willing.
make great art, and I'm going to crack hearts and let light in, and we're going to keep talking about it.
That's what we're here for,
So thanks
brother.
for making time, man.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough,
Wait,
man.
and lastly, we got to show the books off. This book,
Well, that's a very dark book. That's not part of my Scab Vendor memoir series.
Yes.
Well, you watched my movie.
yeah,
And the movie that they made, the documentary they made about me, it was based on the other two books, the Scab Vendor books.
But
Wait, we can talk about that one too. But this is a two-book
series.
two-book series. There should be 4 books, but
Yeah.
I just haven't gotten around to the next 2 started.
Absolute must reads. Buy this book, and give out a shout out to brother Johnny Depp for his love for you and all the great things he's doing. Because
And Robert Crumb, man, one of my childhood
Look
heroes,
at that.
comic book hero. He did the cover art for
Right.
my book.
yeah,
You know, that was the biggest feather in my cap ever. And so these 2 books, yeah, those are the books that inspired the movie by the same title, Scab Vendor, Confessions of a Tattoo Artist. But the other book that you held up, Narcissa, that was my first published book. And that book is a dark roller coaster ride
Yeah.
through hell.
what'll make people love you and appreciate you more. That
Yeah,
you're over on this side now.
that book would make Bukowski cringe.
Yeah. The Seano Show is a production of iHeart Podcasts, hosted by me, Seano McFarlane, produced by Pod People and 28th Ave. Our lead producer is Keith Cornelek. Our executive producer is Lindsay Hoffman. Marketing lead is Ashley Weaver. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.